Thank you, everybody, for coming to the College Football Betting with Aaron Torres YouTube channel. Before we get to the video that you came here for, if you could do me one quick favor, just click that subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow. I appreciate it more than you know. Also, if you want to, click the little bell notification so you know anytime any of our previews go live. We appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. All of the lines presented by Circa Sportsbook, Circa Casino, and let's start with the big one. Top 20 matchup. We had 3 top 10 matchups last week, only 1 top 25 matchup this week. It is Michigan at Oklahoma. Oklahoma, a 4.5-point favorite in this one. The over-under trickling down to 45.5. And I'll say this, 2 super intriguing teams. I think 2 teams that everybody is kind of just curious to see. What do we expect? What do we know? What do we not know? And obviously, look, it starts with 2 quarterbacks at 2 very different points in their careers. John Mateer at Oklahoma, the multiple-year veteran, redshirted at Washington State, where he may or may not have had some interesting Venmo activity, neither here nor there. But redshirted at Washington State, multi-year starter there, goes to Oklahoma with Ben Arbuckle, and of course, Bryce Underwood, the true freshman who made his debut at Michigan. Both these teams kind of a little bit off the radar last week, so let's just get into a little bit about what their games look like. Let's go ahead and start with the Oklahoma Sooners, because listen, we know what's at stake this season. We know, frankly, how bad things went last year, but let's also remember the defense was pretty good last year, and we're going to discuss that, but it was about fixing that offense. And again, they did it with the Washington State combo of John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle. And to the credit of the newbies, they kind of looked the part early, right? I know you're only playing quote unquote Illinois State, but 35-3 win. You're up 21-0 at halftime. You kind of cruise from there. And I thought John Mateer kind of looked the part, right? In this game, 30 of 37 passing, 392 yards, 3 touchdowns for Mateer. As a team, Oklahoma had close to 500 yards of total offense. Mateer almost 11 yards per completion. And I think it's worth noting, as much as we talk about Mateer, and we should, let's keep in mind the wide receiver core is almost completely new outside of Deion Burks. Well, Deion Burks looked very comfortable in that new system. 7 catches, 88 yards, and a touchdown. Keontez Lewis, transfer from Southern Illinois, who began his career at Wisconsin, 2 touchdown catches, 9 catches, 119 yards. So much of the focus has been on Mateer. I don't know that quite enough has been on that wide receiver room, which is largely brand new and very much look like they are ready to compete at the top of college football. Defensively, listen, again, look the part, and the defense really wasn't the issue last year for Oklahoma State. For Oklahoma, big error there. But listen, Brent Venables, whatever you think of him as a head coach, I'm a little bit higher on Brent Venables than a lot of people, but nobody's ever questioned the defense. They had a top 20 defense last year. They just simply could not stay on the field on offense. Too many turnovers. That defense a year ago was elite. And again, it's only Illinois State, but certainly took steps in a positive direction, in the right direction, looked very much in midseason form in week 1. How about this? 151 yards of total offense for Illinois State. Oklahoma holds them to 151 yards. 1 for 11 on third down for Illinois State. Only 8 total first downs. And oh, by the way, this is an incredible stat. 34 yards passing, 1.7 yards per completion for Illinois State. I don't care if that's FCS. I don't care if it's D2, D3, NAIA. You hold a team to those numbers, your defense is flying around. And again, I don't think defense will be an issue as long as Brent Venables not only is your head coach, but is anywhere on your coaching staff. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Michigan really quick. As I mentioned, a big debut in the big house, no different than it was at Oklahoma. Michigan, of course, playing New Mexico last week, and it's the debut of Bryce Underwood. Bryce Underwood, we know the backstory. Number 1 high school quarterback in America, was committed to LSU, flipped right around signing day. He's from Michigan. I got to be real. I'm just going to be real with this audience because I always am. I kind of heard some mixed things out of training camp about would he be ready for week 1? Was he kind of on schedule to be the starter? Well, he gets named the starter, and I thought he looked phenomenal in week 1. This game was on NBC, so I was able to catch a little bit more of it. 21 to 31 passing, 251 yards for Bryce Underwood, 1 touchdown in that game, no interception. So he took care of the football. I think it's worth noting. Remember, this was a team that last year was 131st nationally in pass offense. Okay. They were an absolute train wreck, an absolute disaster when they dropped back to pass the ball, averaged about 129 yards per game. So for Bryce Underwood as a true freshman to throw for 250 yards, I thought it was big. I thought it was important. He looked really good. By the way, you know who else looked really good? Justice Haynes, the transfer from Alabama at running back. It's easy to forget this, and I'm not, we pile on Kalen DeBoer enough on the Aaron Torres pod, but the narrative when Justice Haynes hit the transfer portal was they felt like they were moving in a better direction without him, that they were happy with Jam Miller. I think they would have liked to have Justice Haynes last Saturday if you're Alabama. I know Jam Miller was hurt, but you get the point. Well, Justice Haynes in his Michigan debut, third year as a college football player, 159 yards rushing, 9.9 yards per carry, and 3 touchdowns. I think the receiver core needs to be a little bit better for Michigan. Couple drops, that Sharon Moore addressed during his availability with the media earlier this week. But also worth noting again, another team that had a great defense a year ago. I think that that defense, Wink Martindale, would have liked to slow down the passing game a little bit more. But New Mexico did attempt 47 passes, throwing for over 200 yards. That Michigan run defense, this is impressive. 50 yards allowed on 28 carries, about 1.8 yards per carry for the New Mexico Lobos against Michigan last year. So listen, I think largely everybody looked the part, right? Mateer looked the part. Underwood looked the part. The Michigan run game was good. Both defenses, which weren't a problem last year, were good. So let's go ahead and get to the pick in this game. And I'll be real. Listen, that 4.5 number is really interesting to me. I think it was about as high as 6 earlier in the week. But to me, I know that over-under feels low at 45.5, but that to me is the official pick. That is my best bet. The Circa Sports book best bet, 45.5 and under in the Michigan-Oklahoma game. Listen, first of all, a couple things stand out. One, I hope everybody understands this is not an indictment on either of the quarterbacks, either of the offenses, but there are a few things that stood out to me. First of all, just let's do some basic mental math here. What did I say about the Oklahoma pass defense? Again, I get that it was Illinois State, right? But Oklahoma holding Illinois State to 34 yards passing, 1.7 yards per completion. I understand Illinois State does not have a Bryce Underwood on its roster, but at the same time, road game at night. Obviously, we know Sharon Moore is a former Oklahoma Sooner. He doesn't want to get embarrassed. He doesn't want to put his quarterback in a bad situation. Sorry, dealing with a little bit of a cold here as you see me rub my nose if you're watching on YouTube. But listen, he doesn't want to put his freshman quarterback in a bad spot on the road, and that is why you bring in a Justice Haynes to try to run the football effectively against this Oklahoma defense, especially, by the way, against an Oklahoma defense that was especially good against the pass. You don't want Bryce Underwood dropping back 31 times in this game unless you get ahead and you just feel like pouring it on, which probably won't happen. So I think Michigan is probably pretty conservative in this game. Don't put Bryce Underwood in position to make mistakes early. And then conversely, I'll say this for Oklahoma going into this game, as good as the vibes were coming out of week one, as good as John Mateer looked in week one, and with the understanding that Jaden Ott really didn't get a ton of snaps early, he's obviously the high-profile transfer from Cal. I bring it up because the run game did leave a little bit to be desired if you're an Oklahoma fan, didn't it? And again, I know Jaden Ott, whatever. But at the same time, I do think it's sort of worth noting if you're Oklahoma. Oklahoma finished week one with 103 yards rushing in that game, 24 of them coming from John Mateer. So you take out John Mateer, you take out the running touchdown that he had, Oklahoma with under 100 yards rushing against an FCS opponent. And remember, that was an issue a year ago when they had an entirely new O-line and they really could not move people on the opposing team's defensive front. Speaking of which, listen, I know Michigan lost Kenneth Grant, first-round pick, lost Mason Graham, first-round top 10 pick. But I do think it is sort of worth noting, right, is that Michigan, I know I've talked a lot about Oklahoma being a really stout defense a year ago. Michigan was a top 20 defense in its own right, specifically good against the run. Now, they don't have Mason Graham, they don't have Kenneth Grant, but let's remember, they got plenty of big bodies back from a year ago, and that defense has never been an issue essentially since Jim Harbaugh took over, certainly at least since Mike McDonald got there about 3-4 years ago. You want to argue the Don Brown years, whatever, that's another conversation for another day. But really the last 4 or 5 years, the defense has not been an issue. And so to me, defense travels. I think, Sharon Moore inherently trusts that group. And I think for Oklahoma, it's a little bit of a struggle to move the ball as well. So this game, to me, I would give the edge to Oklahoma being at home. Mateer, the veteran quarterback, Bryce Underwood, first career road start. But this doesn't it feel like 20-17, 20-14, 21-17, something like that. I know 46.5 points is not a lot, but the under feels like the right bet to me.